Welcome everyone. This is episode 53 of the Transmaxxing podcast, and today's topic is the John50 meme. So you may have heard about John50 before, and it is actually based on a real story from someone who did repress for a really long time, but eventually it just became too much for them, and they decided eventually after talking to the therapist that they had to transition. So, well, what is your thought on John 50?
I think it's an unfortunate life to have to fully commit to, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure, as most of the people who were like repressing, as someone who was repressing early on, you know early on what you're feeling, and you're just trying to deny it, thinking that, if you succeed hard enough that it'll go away, but truth be had, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head on that one. I was gonna say, so John, who was 50 at the time, and she was married for 23 years. That would have put them at 27 years old. When they kind of realized, like, hey, I'm going to continue living as a male, get married, and have three children and stuff like that. So, 27 is pretty deep into your life at that point. And
Uh,
so the times were a lot different back then. It wasn't normalized like today. That's why we have this meme now because of all the people who repressed, and then they see people in their teens and young 20s that are transitioning, and they're like, well, they can do it, I can do it.
yeah, I think this was published 2002.
Oh wow, this is really old.
Yeah.
Wow, that's unfortunate. So this person was born like in the 1940s then, or
Yeah,
possibly the 1950s.
so this
So times were
was
a lot different back then.
yeah, it was really hard or even impossible to transition back then, so this is why we hear those stories, because they didn't really have the option to transition in the first place.
Yeah, I don't even know if you could medically transition back then, just with the technology.
I mean, it was available to some people, it's just that it was really gatekept and restricted and controlled. So it was extremely hard to gain access to it, and it was really that known in the first place. But there were people transitioning really early, it just went under the radar.
And not to mention like very early on in these things, like the psychiatrists, they would expect you to, like have like living experience as being a woman. So they would expect you to have like years of cross-dressing and like basically like a test of humiliation in order to possibly have a chance of getting access to HRT.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of like I was gonna talk about the social transition where they were kind of expected. And you definitely could back then, like obviously because of the lack of access to hormones in HRT, you pretty much had to socially transition, either A, to get said hormones, or B, because the hormones just didn't exist yet. It was the only way that you could express your preferred gender, I guess. So, especially back in like the early 1900s, like 1920s, 1930s, when it was, you know, you could probably get away with cross-dressing and stuff like that, and you were just seen as like just abnormal or like a freak or something like that. And as people used to say, the word transvestite.
Personally, I always found it like an appealing to be like a really old transitioner, so I don't think I will like pursue it myself, to be honest.
Yeah, we could talk about maybe what would be a potential cutoff age at the absolute latest. But like assuming you had money, your life put together, good genetics, I always assume maybe like 35 was the absolute cutoff.
I
Because
think,
with 15 years of hormones, that would put you at 50. I think if you start at 35, you would look like a 50-year-old woman eventually over time, vice a 50-year-old male. Because 15 years of HRT is a lot, plus surgeries and stuff.
I haven't talked to too many like late transitioners. There's like the medical or biological limitations with bone structure and everything. So it's around age 24, 25 where your hip bones fuse. So a lot of like transition stuff is kind of limited after that anyway.
That's true. Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to grow much, if any, new bone, like hip bone, for instance. But there are always anomalies, and the 24, 25-year rule isn't hard fast because there's always anomalies in nature where someone who's 26, 27, or even 28 could potentially see changes that are just abnormal, not expected, so to speak, abnormalities. I don't want to say I'm in that cage, but for someone who's been on HRT for a little over 11 months now, with the amount of boob growth I've had, it is kind of crazy. It shouldn't be like this. I'm probably like in the top percentile for, especially with the graphs I've seen with people on day 110 or stage 3, 2 years in HRT. So
One thing I take issue with this article is that the people they focus on here is the people who seek out and reach out to them. I think a lot of people who repress honestly will just continue repressing and never transition. I think it's the minority or crack eventually.
well, Val has some statistics regarding that in terms of the percentage of people over a certain age who end up transitioning. I wonder if she remembers.
I'd have to find the little graph. I don't know if I have like the exact source to go with it. I'd have to go fetching all that. But yeah, it's an extremely high number. I think it was like 37% of people transition over the age of 45 currently. And there's probably like a lot of different colluding factors to this, like, the bigger acceptance, just seeing other people doing it, basically having the eggs cracked. An interesting thing I even saw in the source above is it said that like oftentimes the people who like struggle with like their female identity, oftentimes gender dysphoria would become stronger and stronger the more they felt like it was impossible for them to escape their male situation.
Yeah, that's really true for sure.
Yeah, if you feel that despair and hopelessness, it will be worse. And actually, in my case, I actually found some stuff that kind of worked, like some that I play video games, but I kind of stopped doing that because I didn't really need to anymore. But I kind of want to go back into it when you like make a nice female character in a like beautiful dress or whatever. And you like play some nice game with her and like beat the game on like super hard difficulty. It's kind of underrated.
That's what I did in my late teens and early 20s. I would play mostly like Final Fantasy type games, doing low level challenges, no XP challenges, no magic challenges, restrictive items and stuff like that. And it would take me weeks to months to finish these games because of how restrictive it was and trying to do it as perfectly as possible and not cutting corners or stuff like that. So, and another thing about using female characters in video games, like I guess like the chances of you seeing like if you see a female character in an MMORPG is probably very high that it's a middle-aged man playing as that character.
Yeah.
I think that might be the new John50 is the one having like a super hot female character in an MMO.
Yeah. It seems like most males. Yeah, go ahead.
Honestly, it seems like a somewhat valid cope. I know we talked about this on one of our old podcasts, the avatar maxing. If you truly feel like it is over for you in like the physical kind of space, you can always go into like virtual spaces and you can always just work on your voice. So then, you can look like a pretty girl and then sound like one. And then, you'll get treated like one at the very least online, even if it's not like in person.
They could become VTubers.
Yes,
and kind of
exactly.
really get treated like a female. They'd get the full authentic experience, to include the stalking.
And then you can extract resources from men when you're doing that, and then
Oh,
soon
so
enough
much.
you'll be living the woman life you want to, and it will
Hmm.
also be the job making you money.
Exactly. And you can still keep your male persona in real life, and no one will ever know.
Yeah, you don't have to deal with social bullshit. You don't have to look like a hon who doesn't pass with female clothing and doesn't really fit.
Exactly, yeah. Because unfortunately, it's one of these things people don't realize. As you continue to keep holding off HRT, your body is masculinizing every single day. It may not look like it on a day-to-day basis, but eventually, when you're, say, 35, you're not going to look the same as you did as you were 30. And when you're 30, you're not going to look the same as when you were 25. And so I think they really get into this black hole of things where they're like, well, I didn't start now. Why am I going to start tomorrow? And then it's like, well, now it's too late. And then they just keep coping and repping and coping and repping. And eventually they're going to become a John50 unless they can outlive it or just accept their dysphoria and or AGP or whatever they have. But yeah, we even in this article, it had some older people like in their 60s and 70s who were also transitioning. Because it says here some gender dysphoric individuals proceed into their senior years with their needs and desires to be female still unresolved. Even now, the natal male feelings about the matter may be strong as ever. The relative freedom of gender expression that women enjoy throughout their lives continue, and there is even less pressure on females to be attractive or feminine now that when they're younger. For natal males, the situation is reversed. So, yeah. It is true as you get older as a female, the beauty standards go less and less, where it's opposite for men. They are expected to look better as they're older. And I think that's very true. I think a 60-year-old male will always look better than a 60-year-old female. But vice versa, where a 30-year-old female, especially with hair, makeup, the whole 9 yards, will look way better than a 30-year-old male.
The article did go into how females have way more freedoms when it comes to gender expression than males. So it's totally acceptable for females to be like tomboys and not wear like
Exactly.
feminine clothing. But if a male want to wear like feminine dress, it's not really accepted and it's frowned upon.
Yeah, even people wearing skirts due to like I think it's like the Irishman or something. Like young kids will even look at them and call them like gay and stuff like that. They're like, why is that man wearing that? Because it's already hardwired into their brain from a young age that males dress like this, males act like this, and males do this, and females will dress like this and express femininity their way. And yeah, and then for females, it's a little bit way more accepted for them to dress either as a male or a little bit more androgynous, where they can have maybe shorter haircuts like pixie cuts and stuff like that and wear suits from time to time. They don't always have to wear a dress or a skirt or something like that. They can go to the office wearing something more androgynous, where if a male were to go to the office wearing a skirt and high heels and like a blazer, that just would not fly. And same thing with ties. Like it's not that uncommon for women to wear ties anymore. And I can kind of speak on this in the military sense too, where they're changing the uniforms to be more unisex, where there is no more designated female dress uniform. When I say dress uniform, I mean like the not your everyday wear uniform at work, but if you were going to an event or a ceremony, like a retirement ceremony and stuff like that, the males and the females would wear the same thing now. There would be no designation for gender. Still, males cannot wear skirts in the military.
Oh.
Something I have been thinking about is that while it might be less socially acceptable to not pass and transition late and all that, ironically they might have still less difficulties because the young people are the most vulnerable by society, they are the most targeted by politicians and everything. So like even a young trans female who passes completely still a target of like transphobic politicians and everything. They might be seen as a threat as well because they are too attractive. While the Hons, sure, people might laugh at them or whatever and think they are like Ross. Still are in some weird way more accepted because they are not really a threat and they are like convenient for the transphobes as well.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the current political climate for that stuff. Well, at the same time, I think more people are afraid of legitimately, I would guess they would be called brapons, where they are, legitimately afraid of men, maybe on HRT for a few months, that think they have this entire air of confidence about them. And they go into women/female only spaces such as restrooms and locker rooms, and they're shaving their beard in there, which is not socially acceptable. I've never seen a woman shave her face in a locker room before. Even if they were shaving down there, that would not be socially acceptable to, do something like that in a space like that. So, and then of course it comes down to the whole aspect: does this person pass or did it not pass? Which is kind of shitty that it has to be based on that. Like, oh, you have access to these spaces just based off if you pass or not. Some people may never pass just because of their genetics or access to FFS or something like that. But it all kind of goes back to, generally speaking, it's best to start early because the likelihood of you running into these problems is less and less likely.
Yeah, and what people often forget when it comes to transphobia is that if you actually pass for real and you don't out yourself, then people don't know you're just another female then, so you don't really face those issues. But,
Mm-hmm.
but of
Yeah,
course, if you're
kind of.
like under 18 or you cannot pass for whatever reason, then you have like more troubles potentially.
And I always say you could also try the androgynous route. I think if you don't fully pass, you can kind of just play it off instead of trying to be overly feminine or overly masculine. You can kind of ride that middle ground. I'm not talking non-binary. I'm talking completely androgynous, where you're kind of like presenting a little bit more femme or a little bit more male, but you're not full on like, oh, I use they them pronouns and you have to call me this and that, and I use X on my birth certificate and my license. I don't have a gender. I'm X. As long as you're not kind of running like crazy like that, I think you could probably get away in society as quote unquote like passing as androgynous until you fully pass fully, either you're male or female. Because I guess this kind of goes to like I know it's more of a John50, but the females to males sometimes will have issues passing because of their height or something like that. But at the same time, they could just say they're a short man, and then it's a little bit more socially acceptable. They're just like, oh, sorry, you're just unlucky and you're 5'2" kind of thing.
Ironically, FDM så pass efter att ha blivit divorced. Because then they are like lower tier males instead, rather than like being like masculine females.
I mean, that's another thing is there's nothing wrong with, like, say you're really tall as a trans woman, pick up basketball. It won't look as, you know, like, oh, that makes sense. Like you're really tall and oh, maybe you have that certain build about you because you play sports. If you're a little bit more bulky and you can say, oh, I was an athlete in college and stuff like that. And like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. Instead of these people try to go all out, they try to go in the complete spectrum where they want to be this dainty little princess, but they're 6'5". It's like, well, that's going to be really hard to pull off. And same thing with, there's nothing wrong with being like a feminine bodybuilder or something like that. If you are just really muscular and you have like, you're just built for that in a way. There's nothing wrong with that. You can still be quote unquote female.
I think that we have seen a trend towards like more non-binary identities. And it might be that a lot of people don't really feel strongly that they are male, but they don't really feel strongly that they are female either. They're trying to experiment with those in between options. Not sure how well it really works out, to be honest, but obviously what I wrote in the Transmaxxing manifesto that a lot of people that really feel super strong in either direction is true. And I think the prevalence of non-binary identities is a result of that. And also a lot of people who do sort of repress or whatever, they're not going to end up John50 side, they're just going to keep repressing until they die probably.
Yeah, I wonder how many people were secretly trans that died without ever coming out or ever socially transitioning or ever medically transitioning or even just telling anyone that they've always wanted to be this. I imagine that's quite a few people, especially before it came mainstream.
Yeah, right now there's too much propaganda and pushing people to be gender non-conformative as well. There are all those alternatives to medical transition that people are kind of pushed into, even if they don't really work too well.
Yeah, I think GNC, gender non-conforming, is some people might see it as a backlash to the trans movement, or maybe a spin-off. It's kind of hard to say, but they kind of get a lot of flack because it's hard for these people I work with. They will be more than willing to accept pronouns like he, him, she, her, but they will not use the they, them. They are like, no, I refuse. You are either a boy or a girl, and there's no in between. And they say, and they're even fine with yeah, if you want to transition, that makes sense. And you're trying to be something that exists that you are not right now, but you would like to become that. But they don't understand the non-binary thing, and neither do I, to be honest with you. I don't see how they want to be in between and then switch from, they fab or whatever the hell they use. And it makes no sense to me.
To me it does make sense because I can relate to that, because there have been periods where I would have kind of wanted something like that, but in practice I feel like I used to prefer being either as a male or as a female. I don't really want to be something in between, to be honest, but it's something I considered for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you want to be androgynous, that's okay. But I still think you should have something on your license that says F or M instead of X.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Especially for legality reasons and stuff like that. If you get in trouble and you have to go to prison, where would they put you in terms of stuff as simple as car insurance? What about for rates, discounts, et cetera, et cetera? It's even in the manifesto. Females get lower rates on car insurance, especially in their younger years. So it's what do we do with these people now? When you have a giant X on your birth certificate and driver's license,
Didn't
how
they
are we supposed to change society?
remove that at a bunch of areas? It used to be the case that you could transition to get cheaper car insurance, but a lot of places have taken that away now. This the same rate for both, at least on paper they make it equal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wondering if Val had any opinions about this.
I've noticed that the most of the people who fall closer to androgynous or non-binary tend to be more spiritual people. I don't know if there's anything to it or not, but it does seem like most of the people who are more in tune with themselves kind of want a little bit of a mix of both.
I kind of wanted to be myself in a way, but not via current options, but I feel fundamentally I don't think that I am a female fundamentally or a male fundamentally. I just don't really buy into that line of reasoning.
Like one of my friends, she prefers to be called a woman and such, but sometimes she does dress a little masculinely and she doesn't really care too much about adhering to gender norms and things like that, and she just wants to be herself, truly and honestly.
I can see that, yeah. I don't know. For me, I would rather just fit into a specific gender norm. Not to say that you can't be a little masculine as a female, and that's not to say that you can't be a little feminine as a male. But I think in terms of social structure, it fits better in this current world to, unfortunately, for better or worse, fit into one of those molds where as a male, you're more of the protector and the keeper and make executive decisions and stuff like that. And as the female, you're more submissive and stuff like that and more willing to express yourselves and your emotions, where men, they're a little bit more uptight, bottled up and stuff like that.
I think that most people, regardless, will put you in the male or female category, kind of hard to change that.
Yeah, but then again, it's all labels, and labels don't matter.
So, did you both read that like long story with the different testimonials?
Of the John50?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read the entire thing, and I read it again as well. And yeah, it was kind of one of the things that talking about like how little is known about the people. They exist, but it's indisputable. Like people that are transitioning late, we're talking super late, not like much is known. And keep in mind, yeah, it was back from like the 2000s, so maybe there's a lot more that's known now, because Caitlyn Jenner was also one of those people that transitioned super late. Also a fringe or abnormal statistic because of how wealthy she was, and very few people would be able to pull off what she pulled off. And that's another thing. So it's saying on this last line, it says, along with baldness, punchiness, there are more serious health issues to consider if an older person wishes to transition to the other gender. Cardiac disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, diabetes, and often liver function due to a lifetime of alcohol abuse are some of the most common. Here's a statement from Tom, 6-year-old male who was notifying that he was leaving a starter group to facilitate after attending for 2 months. So it's like I said, once you reach a certain age, and it's not like a hard and fast rule, the masculinization would have been too much. And sometimes it's hard to reverse those effects, especially the internal effects. If people coped with drugs, alcohol, steroids even, it does take a toll on your body. And it does not necessarily masculinize you by drinking alcohol, but it definitely makes you look worse. And if you didn't take care of your body during all those years of repressing, it's going to make your transition even harder, especially as you get older and your body's fighting against it, for better or worse. Some people also respond better or worse to hormones, depending on how they metabolize it, especially estrogen. Some people may not be hyper responders. Some people barely respond at all. It also determines on what they take, pills, patches, injections, if they're on Spiro or not, or any of these really bad anti-androgens that I think do more harm than good. But, I think, like I said, if you're in your mid-30s or younger and you took care of yourself and you do your transition well, especially from the medical portion, you should, in theory, have no problems passing at the age that you biologically are. So if you eventually make it to 37, 38, you should, in theory, have no problem passing as the 37 or 38-year-old woman. I think a lot of people get the misconception is that, oh, I'm going to start hormones and then I'm going to look like a 20-year-old Victoria's Secret model. That's not what's going to happen. You're going to look like what you're genetically destined to look like as a female for the most part, which for a lot of people will be something akin to a sister, cousin, or their mother.
And honestly, I actually think that Caitlyn Jenner had a decently successful transition, considering everything.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. Hers was immaculate.
And he like threw it all away by doing stupid politics stuff later, but
with all the amount of money and fame, fortune she had, like she could afford the best of the best. Anyone else, it's going to be really hard to transition in their 70s. Like it's just going to be so hard. But I think another one of those things is that you'll be a lot more accepted in your 70s at that point. I really think a lot more people would be more willing to accept you as trans. I think a lot more people show compassion to older people despise younger people. I'm talking strictly compassion, not anything else.
Yeah, one advantage potentially with being older is that like the society kind of gears towards you because of politics. So often you might have some pension you can like live off, or you might have like money saved up, so you are not as dependent upon like society for to earn an income.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you can have a lot of money saved up by that point and potentially have good results compared to someone who started, maybe a decade before you that kind of just took the baseline 50 milligrams of Spira and 2 milligrams of estrates, and they're just like, well, why don't I pass? It's like, well, honey, you were on dose for 10 years, and this other person had $100,000 FFS, so of course they're gonna look better than you. So.
And I think what some people do forget about this is that some people do not repress because of shame or societal expectation. They are simply delaying the transition because there are more important things for them to focus on. For example, having a family. And I think
Family, career.
some people get priorities wrong. I think honestly I'd rather be a John50 with children than be like a passing trans woman that dies childless. Not that I will want like either that much, but
I guarantee the person who transitioned at 50 will, I think, feel a lot better knowing they had their kids, vice a person who transitioned at 20 realizes they wanted to have kids, but they've already gotten SRS. And now it's impossible for them to ever have kids. And so, in terms of a mental health standpoint, the quote unquote John50 will probably feel a lot better mentally than the young shit passoid.
yeah, I remember hearing something that it's not Hon that is like envious about the Persa, it's the Persa who is envious about the Hon because the Hon had like a career, reproduced, like had kids and everything and was actually successful as a male, why they had to like give it up like right away.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's probably, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but it seems like I think Val can also attest to this, and I've seen it a lot recently on sites like Reddit, on different subreddits like 4chan 4, where it's always the young shit. Like we're talking 18 and younger that have been on hormones for a bit, and they're the most doomer posting, saying it's over, it's never going to get better. Why can't I do this? When people who started in their 20s or 30s, they're like, you were just completely out of touch with reality because we had to like live through the repression ages and years and stuff, and then we're finally able to start hormones. Like I could, Val had to wait on a wait list just to start HRT. So it's like we went through the worst of the worst, and it kind of made us into strong people mentally.
Yeah, I had to wait 3 years before seeing a psychiatrist and getting HRT.
Yeah, I think there is something to say though to live a successful life as a male. I think that has a lot of power that the people will never understand. And I'm not saying it makes anyone more valid or invalid as a female or a trans woman or anything like that, but I think there is something special about that, especially as being, if they were a father at one point or a successful businessman or something like that, because that stuff doesn't come from luck. That's something that they built personally. So,
Yeah, definitely. You can, to some extent, be lucky when running a business. Of course, there is like timing and
yeah,
stuff, but overall, you need to kind of be competent in a way. It's not always true, but generally, like the free market and competition and capitalism kind of selects for certain qualities in people, and the people who lack those qualities tend to not make it very far. But I'm not saying you necessarily have to go that path. It's something if you can really succeed in consistently rather than being like lucky and maybe like striking gold because of some coincidence, but it's kind of rare and most people who think they have some way to get rich quick just get scammed instead.
I guess kind of the same thing as for the fatherhood aspect or as the husband aspect, to have like a successful marriage at one point. Not saying like the person got divorced when they started HRT or anything like that, but to really live their best life. And they basically accomplish everything they wanted to do. And they're like, well, I think now it's the one thing I've always wanted to do, and that's start gender transition. Like they've kind of accomplished everything they wanted to do in their male life, so to speak.
Yeah, and something I find frustrating is that a lot of people don't get that not everyone has like super severe crippling gender dysphoria. For some people, it's not really a priority in the first place.
Yeah. And it's timing and everything. Well, I guess now not so much. There's not as much gatekeeping. I guess I don't know how it is in other countries besides Canada and the United States, but you can get HRP prescription the same day appointment here in the United States with many different services. It's just not Planned Parenthood. It's gender clinic, Plume, Folks, all that stuff. You can get same day HRT prescription as your appointment. You may have to wait for a set appointment for maybe a week, 2 weeks, maybe up to a month to be able to talk to a doctor. But once you do talk and they went over your medical history and stuff like that and asking if you really want this, it's quite easy after that to get your prescription.
It's actually a lot harder in most European countries because of the systems are more socialized and centralized by the government. And the governments in Europe are not actually that supportive of trans people, in case you didn't know.
Yeah, I was gonna
Like,
say no, and yeah, because it makes sense because they need to determine if it's a medical necessity, maybe to pay for essentially paying for someone's lifetime prescription of estrogen and whatever else they're taking. Or I guess like kind of in America, the free market capitalist society kind of was able to shine through on this one, where people realized maybe a bunch of doctors got together and stuff was like, hey, why don't we just privatize this? And
actually,
people would say it sucks to have to pay a doctor, but at least there's no gatekeeping and there's no wait list.
in Europe, it's not so much of a cost issue, it's more about them not wanting people to harm themselves. It's different ideology here. We aren't as libertarian, for better or worse. So there's this
Yeah,
notion that we need to have like a psychiatrist or whatever who like tell people if they're all to transition. And sure, it's not like that everywhere, but it's more ingrained that thinking here than America.
yeah. I think people here they just saw the profits and was like, okay, let's do this. Like I said, for better or for worse, I have no opinion when it comes to that. I do like the accessibility. At the end of the day, that's more important than anything, is to remove gatekeeping. Because even if, like, let's say they just wanted to try HRT, like some people just want to go to Planned Parenthood, get a quick prescription, try it out. Granted, they're going to be like really low dosage, and they're probably going to be on Spiro. But I think even if they just try it and then they're able to see, okay, this isn't for me, at least they were able to try it without having to go through the gatekeeping.
Yeah,
Because
this is
imagine
something people
being on a wait
often.
list for years and then realizing, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. That would suck, I think.
Yeah, people overestimate the issues when it comes to temporarily trying HRT. Like, it isn't really a big deal if you like try it for like 2 weeks and then stuff occurs.
Yeah, I know. Like, it shouldn't matter. So,
But honestly, I kind of find the surgeries being like regulated in a way. I'm not really against like government control in general. It's just that it has to be competently done.
I agree. Yeah. If it's done in competence, like you said, and it's done in a smart, logical way that makes sense. Sometimes it's okay to have controls and restraints placed, especially on life-altering medications, especially testosterone. It's, at least in the United States, I think it's a Schedule 3 drug, so it is heavily I guess you could say controlled. Much like where estrogen is more just like a class 4, class 5, where yes, it is controlled, but only through a prescription use only. And it's like, okay, cool, you got a prescription and you can legally have it. No one's going to ever question you. Of course, you can always just make your own, but that's not here nor there.
But ironically, like bodybuilders are like using loads of testosterone anyway with all the steroids. It's like they're not really being stopped. And this could maybe give some hope to the doomers, because look at the bodybuilders, and the steroids have been illegal for like forever, and they are still been able to like keep using that.
Exactly. You can home brew your own testosterone as well, and there's different derivatives of testosterone. It's just not one. Same thing with, I guess, estrogen. There's, well, mostly estradiol, but that's what you want. But there's estrone, estriol, and stuff like that. So there's weaker forms of everything, but the most feminizing is estradiol, and that's what you want, and that's what you don't want to get hondosed, because you want to feminize and you don't want to just halt masculinization. You truly want to feminize your body.
I heard about some bodybuilders going to some like shady doctors to prescribe it legally as well.
I bet you, yeah. That sounds, yeah, there's probably a lot of shady stuff out there. Like, medical degree and medical profession is still very well respected. But, some people can get through the 8 years, and if they want to make some quick money on the side, if that's what happens down here where I live, there's a doctor, he's a no shit MD, but he most likely will sell, I'm not going to say he sells his prescriptions, but I would not be surprised if he makes a little side hustle and getting his friends on TRT and just says, oh yeah, they need TRT, they have a low T, so they prescribe testosterone ethanoate or something like that, just to get them quote unquote legal steroids.
Yeah, stuff like that happens all the time.
Yeah, I personally have seen it down here. My old trainer used to tell me about it, which I don't know why, but when he was just personal training for a month, and it's just like, well, what are we going to talk about in between sets and during nutritional checkups? So we would just talk about stuff like that. It was fun times. He was also on steroids. I did not know that at the time, but it made sense now, given his body physique. He was very lean, and but he was very muscular too. It's because he was able to maintain a lot of his mass due to his testosterone use. So I thought he just had really good genetics, to be honest with you, but it was not the case.
By the
It
way,
still didn't invalidate anything he taught me, though, for sure. It did not invalidate it. So I don't know if you know, but Val can attest to the changes of my body just from dieting and working out alone. It
Yeah.
still holds true even if you're taking estrogen. A lot of the stuff, this is kind of like a different topic, but a lot of people will be hesitant to work out and eat protein as a female because they don't see it as a feminine thing. They just see it as a manly thing. Well, it's actually a human in nature thing to eat protein and animal meats. It's what we ate for hundreds and thousands of years. And believe it or not, most breast tissue is made from protein and amino acids. And I can attest that eating all this chicken and stuff I've been eating and keeping my carbs low and keeping my sugar low and increasing my water intake and doing proper exercise, not overdoing it, but not underdoing, like really min-maxing, I've had amazing results. Much more than with my trainer, actually, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I don't know where the misconception comes in that like your body's gonna try to build muscles if you eat protein, but that is definitely not the case whatsoever. Like, training, like strength training, that's one thing that, you can debate whether or not you need, but an important diet is quintessential when it comes to transition.
Mm-hmm. You don't want to starve max yourself or anorexia max. Like, I think they call it animaxing, but yeah, you want to be eating a well-balanced diet for sure, and you want to be getting adequate sleep. You want to be getting proper nutrition, proper exercise. Your micro and macronutrients are super important. There's probably some studies that have been done on the effects of like boron, zinc, magnesium. Just because men take these things doesn't mean a trans woman can't take these things either. Like I said, our bodies are all the same. We have the same DNA 23 chromosomes. It's not like anyone's built any differently than someone else. It's just how our body responds to these chemicals and stuff that we put inside our bodies that makes us different. The baseline chemical structure is still the same. No one is any different than anyone else.
By the way, Val, when you read this story that I linked, did this remind you of like people in the server?
Yeah, a little bit actually. A part of it actually reminded me of myself as well. You know, when I was in my like repression era, and a part of me genuinely thought that I was gonna be a husband with kids, still repping, and I'm so happy that I never actually came about and have a life like that.
I knew it was over for me from a teenage age. I remember telling my parents and like different family, like aunts and uncles and stuff like that, because they would ask me like, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend? Do you want kids? Like, when are you getting married, et cetera, et cetera?" And I told them, "No, I don't want to." And for the longest time, I never knew exactly why. But once I became in like my 20s, like around 25, 26, I was like, I know why now. It was the subconscious feeling of the John50. Of course, I didn't know what it was at the time, but subconsciously, I knew I couldn't put a potential partner, a potential cis marriage, husband and wife, through that. Nor if I had kids, I wouldn't want to do that to my kids, where my children would have to watch someone change before their very own eyes and kind of have to be there at the worst of the worst. Like the first year of a gender transition is not very aesthetically pleasing, so to speak. You look weird. There's a lot of things that are changing, sometimes rapidly, and it quite literally is a second puberty. And I think for a young child, it would be really hard to explain that to them. Maybe if you had teenage kids, they would understand a little bit more, but if your kid is 8 years old or younger, it would be really hard for them to kind of understand what the hell is going on. I did not want that at all. Nor was I really interested in having sex with women, to be honest with you. It's not to say I was not sexually active. It's just I wasn't what they would call a woman chaser by any means.
I guess this can also lead to you not really being successful as a male because you're not really trying.
Exactly, yeah. When all these people that I work with are married and have kids. Not everyone, but a lot, and they're kind of seen as a quintessential successful male, so to speak, because they have a beautiful wife and they have a beautiful kid or kids, and their kids are going to school, making good grades in, primary school and stuff like that, and they're taking them to sports practice and doing this and that with them, going on family vacations. So on the outside, it looks like they have everything put together, but you never know what that person's going on the inside of their mind. They could be repressing. You don't know that. And I personally did not want to go through that. So I stopped. And I took the pink pill, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think this marks the end of episode 53 of the Transmaxxing podcast. I hope that you will have a nice day forward and maybe one day you will also be John50. Goodbye everyone!